Hi, my name is Caleb L. Lane, an American car enthusiast and car history enthusiast with a particular passion for French and Italian cars because France and Italy have had long histories in the car, just as, say, the USA or Germany or the UK, the typical countries that get thought of for cars because people are typically thinking about Ford or Cadillac or Buick from the USA or Rolls Royce, Aston Martin, or Jaguar from the United Kingdom or BMW, Mercedes Benz, and Porsche from Germany. But Italy and France have done just as much, except their industries are declining so much that the history is often forgotten. Part of that history starts in France with this car right here. It's a 1902 Garnier Serpollet Type H. It was a world record setting race car that was steam, but it does not look like a steam car, and the reason for that is the invention of the electric flash steam tube, a tube running on electricity to compel steam. Water ran into the tube, electricity flashed on it, and created steam. And the steam was released through this giant gold pipe you see right here underneath the vehicle, just like an exhaust emissions pipe in an internal combustion engine car. This was the invention of the company's co-founder Leo Serpollet, a French mechanical engineer who earned his degree from Paris Technical Art School in 1879. And after graduating, he went on to start designing and building steam cars in Paris from 1881 forward. But it wasn't until later on that he got the idea to do this because his family had a history of art, and he also wanted his cars to be not just fast but pretty. And steam cars had a bad reputation for looking ugly because of all the boiler and all the giant pipes coming from the top of the vehicle. And Larry Serpollet knew that the only way to get rid of that was to come up with something where he could close it off. And you look at this, I mean, it doesn't even look like 1902 does it because it's so extremely aero for the time. I mean, the car suffers from low center of gravity because it sat so tall. But as far as the body, it was extremely aero for the time. And that made Leo Serpollet one of the great geniuses of the early automotive industry. He'd come up with this innovation, and I don't think anyone else could have done it. As for Garnier is a reference to Frank Gardner, an American businessman who met Serpollet in Paris in 1896 to change the company from just Serpollet to Garnier Serpollet. Leo, like many great engineers, was not a very good businessman, and he was starting to run out of that thing that can keep the company going, money. He didn't have it, but he didn't care because he understood that it shouldn't just be all about money, but more about passion and invention, and he was willing to do that. He drove this car himself at the 1902 Paris hill climb race, where he went 121 kilometers an hour. That's 75 miles an hour. He set the world record at the time, even though it would not last long because other French companies right there in Paris with the internal combustion engine would soon beat him right afterwards. But unfortunately, he passed away just 5 years later at 48 in 1907 from yellow disease. And people still cannot figure out why he died so young. But he was one of the great early automobile innovators and is today honored in France as the perfecter of the steam car. And you could not be more literal than that because he did more to modernize the steam car than anybody else. Next car, Gobert Brill, also a French company based in Paris, founded by the politician and financier Gustave Gobert and the mechanical engineer Auger Brill. Brill was also a genius. He was educated at Colle at either at Colle Centrale Paris or Paris Technical Art School. I cannot remember, but he earned a degree in mechanical engineering. And uh, his innovation was also peculiar in this car right here. He created a first opposed piston internal combustion engine, which is an internal combustion engine with a piston acting diagonally at each end of the cylinders, but no cylinder head. It has no cylinder head. The pressure just went right in between the cylinders pistons while the valves rotated. But what was even more quirky about his engine is that it ran on alcohol, not on gasoline. I mean, that's why I have the red wine right here, or vin rouge, which is French for red wine. And French people love red wine. And O.J. Brill figured that he could get an internal combustion engine to run on red wine and then win races. And this car right here, his 1904 Gobro Brill 110 horsepower Grand Prix, yeah, 110 horsepower in 1904. And you had American cars that were barely making that some 50 years later. I mean, it shows that French people were serious innovators with cars. And this car broke the world land speed record previously held by Garner Serpollet and then by Moore, another French company. Gobro Brill went 168.9 kilometers an hour. That's 104.4 miles an hour. It was the first car to go over 100 miles an hour. And some people were scared because they thought, well, we already got cars that can go over 161 kilometers or 100 mph. At the turn of the 20th century, and the infrastructure at the time and limited braking technology and tire technology was not meant to support such speeds. But nevertheless, they rode with it, and it was fun. And this car also looks really weird, does it not? It has no grill. It's very aerodynamic for the time, which also allowed it to be faster. Uh, Next car, also French, Richard Brazier, also in Paris. And like the previous two founders versus just one, Georges Richard and Henry Brazier. Henry Brazier was a college educated mechanical engineer who had been chief technical director at Panhard Levisay, that's the car on my shirt, and and he was later the chief engineer at Moore. He designed their 1902 60 horsepower Grand Prix racer that was going to break the world land speed record, traveling 134.9 kilometers an hour. That's 83 miles an hour. And he eventually hooked up with Georges Richard, a self-taught manufacturer of mechanical components who had been doing bicycles at his own workshop in Paris, but he wanted to transition the factory from bicycles to cars. He had seen all the French cars on the streets of Paris, the Panhard Levisol, the Garner Serpollet, the Peugeot, the Moore, the Gautier World. He had seen all of them and wanted to get his own. And he knew the only way to do it was to hook up with someone with connections to the industry like Henry Brazier. The partnership did not last long, and Georges Richard actually went on to continue running the company by himself. Brazier was reportedly kind of arrogant and wanted to move on after just 4 years of partnership. I guess he thought that he was too good for Georges Richard. But nevertheless, this car, the 96 horsepower Grand Prix racer they built in 1904, went on to win the Gordon Bennett Cup in the United Kingdom that year and the following year, 1905. And it could travel up to 164.47 kilometers an hour, which is 102.2 miles an hour. It has a 15.2 liter inline four cylinder, absolutely massive. And it was a flathead engine. It was cast iron, producing 96 horsepower. But nevertheless, engines are a lot smaller now. Next, also French, Laurent de Dietrich, two founders. Except this company, unlike most of the rest, was not in Paris. They operated in the town of Lunéville, which is the capital of the Lorraine region in northern France, which is part of the company's name. And the other half comes from Auger de Dietrich. He was a French mechanical engineer and made an entrepreneur, Adrien de Taquin, a self-taught mechanical constructor, and de Dietrich himself was college educated. It always seemed that these partnerships ended up with one person who was formally educated and one person who was self-taught, but nevertheless it worked out. And this car right here is their 60 horsepower Grand Prix racer with the number 11, and in 1906 it finished fourth at the French Grand Prix. Unfortunately, Lorraine de Dietrich did not have quite the success that some of these other companies had, although they did make many inventions. A few years later, for example, they made the very first car with front mid-engine rear-wheel drive. It's a car that's rear-wheel drive and has the internal combustion engine at the front of the chassis, but the axle is entirely in front of that engine. Hence the name front mid-engine. It's behind the front axle, in between the two axles at the front. Nevertheless, this company could not last quite like some of the others would.